The room falls silent as the Nobel Committee chairman steps to the podium. I stand at the back, my heart hammering against my ribs. 5 years ago, I was just another promising postdoc at MIT, working 18-hour days on what I believed would revolutionize quantum computing. 5 years ago, Professor James Whitmore, my mentor, my academic father, smiled as I walked him through my breakthrough. 5 years ago, I watched that same smile spread across his face on international television as he announced his discovery. I quit academia the next day, deleted my research, abandoned my dissertation, vanished from the scientific community. Everyone thought I was having a mental breakdown. Maybe I was. But today, as Whitmore adjusts his bow tie and prepares to accept the highest honor in science, I clutch a small device in my pocket, my insurance policy, the recording I made the day I showed him my work, the proof I never thought I'd use. The committee chairman is saying something about contributions to humanity when he pauses, confusion crossing his face as a technician whispers something in his ear. He frowns, then nods. Before we continue with the ceremony, he says, there appears to be some additional material the committee needs to present. That's my cue. My past and future collide in this moment as the lights dim and my voice, 5 years younger but unmistakably mine, fills the grand hall. Academia was my real family. I grew up in Pittsburgh, the only child of distracted parents, mom a hospital administrator, dad an accountant who traveled constantly. They provided everything I needed materially, but emotionally, we operated like polite roommates. When I won the state science fair in 8th grade, they sent a congratulatory text from a business conference in Chicago. My refuge became the labs and libraries. Mrs. Hernandez, my high school physics teacher, was the first to recognize something in me. You don't just understand the equations, Eliza, you feel them. She pushed me toward MIT, wrote recommendation letters, helped me secure scholarships. When I got accepted, my parents seemed relieved, one less thing to worry about. At MIT, Professor James Whitmore became my academic father. A quantum computing pioneer with steel gray hair and penetrating blue eyes, he had a reputation for being brilliant but brutal. If you can't defend your ideas against me, you'll never survive peer review, he'd say during our infamous lab meetings where doctoral students often left in tears. But I thrived under his mentorship. I remember the first time he actually smiled at my work. I'd stayed up 3 days straight refining a theoretical model. This, he tapped my equations, this has potential. Coming from Whitmore, it was like winning the Nobel Prize itself. Our relationship evolved. He invited me to collaborate on papers, introduced me to his network of elite scientists, even brought me to his Nantucket summer home for a weekend think tank with colleagues from CERN and Caltech. His wife Barbara treated me like the daughter they never had. James hasn't been this excited about a student's work in decades, she confided one evening over wine. Not everyone celebrated our partnership. Dr. Renata Santos, another professor in our department, pulled me aside after a conference. Be careful with Whitmore. He has a history of, let's call it, enthusiastic collaboration with his promising students. I dismissed her warning as academic jealousy. Why wouldn't I? Whitmore was arranging my future, recommending me for prestigious fellowships, helping me secure grant funding. When he suggested I focus my dissertation on quantum entanglement manipulation, his specialty, I felt honored. The turning point came during my 3rd year. I'd been exploring an unconventional approach to quantum gate operations, something Whitmore initially dismissed as creative but impractical. For months, I worked in secret, stealing time between my assigned projects. When the math finally aligned with my intuition, I created a simulation that demonstrated a 40% efficiency improvement over existing methods. I'll never forget that December morning. Snow falling outside our Cambridge lab, the building nearly empty during winter break. I'd asked Whitmore to meet me, said I had something important to show him. He arrived with 2 coffees, mine exactly how I liked it, oat milk and cinnamon. This better be good, Eliza. Barbara's making Christmas dinner and I promise to be home by 3. I connected my laptop to the projector and walked him through my findings step by step. His expression shifted from polite interest to focused intensity to something I'd never seen before, a mixture of awe and calculation. "This? Remarkable," he said finally. "How long have you been working on this approach?" "About 7 months," I admitted. "I know it wasn't part of my approved research plan, but—" No, he interrupted, smiling broadly. "This is exactly why I wanted you on my team. You see possibilities others miss." He studied the equations again. "We need to develop this further. Keep it between us for now. Groundbreaking work attracts vultures." I nodded eagerly, interpreted his caution as protection rather than what it was, the first step in scientific theft. He suggested I email him all my notes, data, and simulations so he could help refine the concept over the holiday. I did. That was my fatal mistake. January came, and Whitmore returned from break distracted and unavailable. My emails about the quantum gate innovation went unanswered. "Working on a major breakthrough," his automatic reply stated. "Limited correspondence until further notice." The department buzzed with rumors. Whitmore had canceled his graduate seminar, unprecedented in his 20-year career. When I finally cornered him after a faculty meeting, his demeanor had changed. "Eliza, good to see you," he said briskly, checking his watch. "I've been meaning to talk about your research direction." "My quantum gate approach?" I asked hopefully. He frowned slightly. "No, I'm thinking you should return to your original dissertation proposal, the entanglement manipulation framework we discussed last fall. But the efficiency improvements in my new model were interesting, but ultimately not viable," he interrupted. "I ran some advanced simulations. The approach breaks down under realistic conditions." Something in his tone felt wrong. Could I see those simulations? "Of course," he said smoothly. "I'll have my assistant send them. Now, I'm late for a call with DARPA." The simulations never came. Instead, 2 weeks later, the department chair announced a special lecture. Professor James Whitmore would be presenting a revolutionary approach to quantum gate operations to the physics community. My stomach dropped when I saw the title. I told myself it couldn't be what I feared. Whitmore was ethical, respected, my mentor. Perhaps he'd found a different approach to the same problem. Perhaps he was going to credit my contributions. The lecture hall was packed, faculty, students, even representatives from quantum computing companies. I sat in the back row, hands trembling. When Whitmore stepped to the podium, he looked confident, energized. "For the past several months," he began, "I've been developing a novel approach to quantum gate operations that promises to overcome the efficiency barriers that have limited practical quantum computing." As he clicked through his slides, my blood turned to ice. These were my equations, my simulations, my breakthrough, with minor cosmetic changes. Not once did he mention my name or contribution. Questions came after the presentation. Dr. Santos, who had warned me, raised her hand. "This approach seems to diverge significantly from your previous work, James. What sparked this new direction?" Whitmore smiled. "Sometimes scientific intuition leads us down unexpected paths. I was working on a different problem entirely when I realized this alternative framework might apply." I sat frozen, unable to breathe properly. Someone nudged me. "Marcus, another doctoral student in our lab. Isn't that basically what you were working on?" he whispered. I couldn't answer. The room spun around me as Whitmore continued fielding questions, accepting congratulations. After the lecture, colleagues swarmed him while I slipped out a side door and vomited in the hallway bathroom. That night, I paced my small apartment until dawn, cycling through disbelief, rage, and heartbreak. I checked my emails. Yes, there it was, December 23rd, the message where I'd sent Whitmore everything. I searched for any earlier documentation of my work, but I'd been careful to keep it secret until I was ready to show him. My lab notebook had entries, but they were handwritten, easily dismissible. Except for one thing. The day I'd presented my findings to Whitmore, I'd recorded our meeting, a habit I'd developed to review complex discussions later. I found the audio file and listened. There I was, explaining each component of the innovation. There was Whitmore, asking questions, praising my ingenuity. There was the explicit moment where he said, "This is your breakthrough, Eliza. Let me help you develop it." I had proof, but Whitmore had reputation, power, connections, everything I didn't. The next morning, I requested a meeting with the department chair, Dr. Holloway. When I entered his office, Whitmore was already there, face grave. "Eliza," Dr. Holloway began, "Professor Whitmore tells me you've been under significant stress lately." Whitmore looked at me with practiced concern. "I'm worried about you. The pressure of doctoral work can be overwhelming, and sometimes it leads to confusion about contributions and ideas." I realized then what was happening. He was preemptively discrediting me. Before I could speak, he continued, "The work I presented yesterday builds on concepts we've discussed in our research group, certainly. All my students contribute to the intellectual environment, but the core innovation, that was the result of my research over the holiday break." "That's not true," I said, voice barely audible. "I have a recording." "A recording?" Dr. Holloway looked uncomfortable. "She recorded our meeting without my knowledge or consent?" Whitmore said, his concern shifting to disappointment. "Eliza, that's a serious ethical breach." Dr. Holloway frowned. "Recording without consent is against university policy." I was being outmaneuvered by a master. "But the recording proves—" "I think what it proves," Whitmore interrupted gently, "is that we discussed related concepts. Science builds on collaboration, but the breakthrough formulation was mine." As the meeting continued, I realized I was fighting a losing battle. Every point I raised, Whitmore had a counter already prepared. Dr. Holloway grew increasingly uncomfortable, clearly wishing this potential scandal would disappear. "Perhaps," Whitmore finally suggested, "Eliza would benefit from some time away from the lab. Mental health is important, and graduate studies can be overwhelming." Dr. Holloway nodded gratefully at this solution. "Excellent idea. Take some time, Eliza. We can discuss your research direction when you return." I left that office understanding exactly what had happened and what would continue to happen. My career in academia was effectively over. If I fought, I'd be labeled unstable, difficult, ungrateful. If I stayed, I'd watch my work advance Whitmore's already stellar career while I was redirected to safe, inconsequential projects. That afternoon, I drafted 2 emails, one to the department, formally withdrawing from the doctoral program, one to Barbara Whitmore, with no text, just an attachment, the audio recording of her husband stealing my research. Then, I packed my apartment, deleted my research files, and disappeared from academic life completely. 5 years passed. I rebuilt my life in Seattle, far from MIT and quantum physics. I took a coding job at a small tech startup, adopted a dog named Schrödinger, yes, ironic, and tried to forget. Then, last month, my phone exploded with messages. Former classmates, Dr. Santos, even Marcus, all sending the same news. Professor James Whitmore had won the Nobel Prize in Physics for his work on quantum gate operations. My work. The announcement cited his revolutionary approach that increased quantum computing efficiency by 40%, the exact figure from my simulations. There was my breakthrough, wrapped in Swedish prestige and a $1 million prize. I should have deleted the messages and moved on. Instead, I found myself diving into a rabbit hole, reading everything about Whitmore's rise since I'd left. His breakthrough had led to practical applications, corporate partnerships, a quantum computing startup that was now valued at billions. He'd become the American face of quantum physics, complete with TED Talks and magazine covers. In one interview, he spoke about inspiration. The most significant breakthroughs often come when you're looking elsewhere. This particular innovation struck me during a quiet moment over Christmas break 5 years ago. That was when something broke inside me. Not just anger, but a calm, cold clarity. The truth deserved to exist in the world, regardless of consequences. I still had the recording, backed up in multiple places after I left MIT. I listened to it again. 43 minutes of evidence. My voice explaining each component of the innovation. Whitmore's questions. His explicit acknowledgement that this was my work. His promise to help develop it, not steal it. The Nobel Prize ceremony was 3 weeks away. I booked a flight to Stockholm. What I didn't expect was the email from Barbara Whitmore that arrived 2 days before my departure. I need to see you. I never deleted your recording. We met at a coffee shop in Boston. She looked older, tired. James doesn't know I'm here, she said immediately. After you sent me that recording, I confronted him. He denied everything, said you were unstable, misinterpreting a routine advising session. But you knew, I said. She nodded, eyes downcast. I've been married to him for 30 years. I know when he's lying. She hesitated. There were others before you. Not many. He's selective about who he steals from. Only the most brilliant, the ones whose work could change everything. And you stayed silent? I'm not proud of that. She placed a USB drive on the table. This contains every email between you and James, the original recording, and something else, statements from 2 other former students with similar experiences. I stared at her. Why now? Because the Nobel Prize is different. It's history. It's forever. She pushed the drive toward me. Do what you need to do. In Stockholm, I made contact with Dr. Sven Lindberg, a member of the Nobel Committee who had expressed ethical concerns about scientific attribution in the past. I didn't explain everything, just asked for 5 minutes of his time before the ceremony. This is highly irregular, he said when we met in his office at the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. So is awarding the Nobel Prize for stolen research, I replied, and played the recording. His face remained impassive as he listened, but his knuckles whitened around his pen. When it finished, he asked only one question. What do you want? The truth, acknowledged. Nothing more. He was silent for a long moment. I will need to consult with the committee. I left without knowing if I'd accomplished anything beyond satisfying my own need for the truth to exist somewhere outside my head. The ceremony arrived. The Stockholm concert hall gleamed with prestige and power. I used my tech background to secure a position on the audiovisual team, a contractor brought in for the live broadcast. No one questioned my presence as I tested equipment and ran cables. Whitmore arrived to applause, beaming in his tailored tuxedo. He didn't notice me. Why would he? I was just another worker in black clothing, invisible in the technical periphery. As the ceremony began, I stood at my station, heart pounding. The committee chairman approached the podium to introduce the physics laureate. He spoke of Whitmore's contributions, the significance of the quantum gate breakthrough, the future it promised. And then it happened. The chairman paused, confusion crossing his face as a technician, not me, approached and whispered something. He frowned, then nodded. Before we continue with the ceremony, he said, there appears to be some additional material the committee needs to present. The lights dimmed, screens throughout the hall lit up, and my voice, 5 years younger, but unmistakably mine, filled the grand hall. For the next 3 minutes, the recording played, crystal clear, undeniable, my explanation of the breakthrough, Whitmore's questions, his explicit acknowledgement. This is your breakthrough, Eliza. The audience stirred, murmurs spreading like ripples. I watched Whitmore's face transform, confusion, then recognition, then a sickening pallor as he realized what was happening. When the recording ended, Dr. Lindberg stepped to the podium. The Nobel Committee has a responsibility to scientific truth, he said gravely. Information has come to light that requires acknowledgement. The breakthrough being honored today originated with Dr. Eliza Carrington, then a doctoral candidate at MIT under Professor Whitmore's supervision. Cameras swung wildly, searching for reactions, explanations. Whitmore half rose from his seat, then sank back down as Barbara placed a restraining hand on his arm. In light of this evidence, Dr. Lindberg continued, the committee must reconsider its decision. This ceremony is temporarily suspended pending a full investigation. Chaos erupted. Journalists shouted questions. Attendees turned to each other in shock. And through it all, I stood at my station, perfectly still, watching 5 years of suppressed truth finally break free. Whitmore found me as security began clearing the hall. His face was ashen, eyes wild with a mixture of rage and fear. "You," he said, voice barely audible. "You destroyed everything." I looked at my former mentor, this man I had once revered, who had shaped my understanding of science and then betrayed its most fundamental principles. "No, Professor," I replied calmly. "You did that yourself, 5 years ago in a snowy lab in Cambridge." Then I walked past him, out of the concert hall, and into the cold Stockholm evening, feeling, for the first time in years, the weight of silence lifting from my shoulders. The aftermath was both simpler and more complex than I'd imagined. The Nobel Committee announced a formal investigation, temporarily suspending Whitmore's award, unprecedented in the prize's history. Within hours, quantum theft was trending worldwide. The scientific community, which had elevated Whitmore to its pantheon, now faced uncomfortable questions about power, attribution, and who gets believed. I hadn't planned for what came next. My phone rang at 3 a.m. in my Stockholm hotel room, a New York Times reporter who'd somehow tracked me down. By morning, my inbox had hundreds of messages. Journalists, scientists, lawyers, publishers offering book deals, streaming services pitching documentaries. The quiet life I'd built in Seattle evaporated overnight. MIT launched its own investigation. Dr. Holloway, the department chair who had dismissed my claims, issued a carefully worded statement about taking all allegations of research misconduct seriously. Former classmates came forward with stories, not just about Whitmore, but other professors who had borrowed liberally from student work without attribution. Dr. Santos called me directly. "I wish you'd come to me back then," she said. "I suspected, but without evidence." "Would it have mattered?" I asked. Her silence was answer enough. 3 days after the ceremony, I received an unexpected visitor at my hotel. Marcus, my former labmate, now an associate professor at Stanford. "I should have said something 5 years ago," he said, as we sat in the hotel lobby. "I knew something was wrong when Whitmore presented your work." "Why didn't you?" He looked ashamed. "Career preservation. Whitmore had just agreed to be on my dissertation committee. I told myself it wasn't my fight." He hesitated. "But that's not why I'm here. There's something you should know about your quantum gate approach." Marcus explained that after Whitmore published his breakthrough, a team at Google's quantum lab had built on the work, achieving the first true quantum advantage for a practical problem. That led to innovations in cryptography, material science, drug discovery. My stolen idea had helped create cancer treatments and climate modeling tools that were saving lives. "Your work changed the world," Marcus said, "even if no one knew it was yours." "Until now," I replied. A week later, more revelations emerged. 2 former Whitmore students contacted the committee with similar stories. Different research areas, same pattern of theft. Barbara filed for divorce, publicly stating she could no longer be complicit in dishonesty that undermines the very foundation of scientific progress. MIT's investigation concluded faster than anyone expected. The evidence was too overwhelming to drag out. Whitmore was placed on administrative leave pending termination proceedings. The university president called me personally to offer reinstatement to the doctoral program with full funding and a formal acknowledgement of my contribution. "No, thank you," I said. "That chapter of my life is closed." What I didn't tell him was that I'd already accepted a different offer from Dr. Lindberg and the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. They were establishing a new initiative on research ethics and attribution, with a particular focus on power dynamics in academia. They wanted me to help lead it. "Your experience," Dr. Lindberg said when he proposed the role, "gives you a unique perspective, and your courage in coming forward despite the personal cost demonstrates the integrity science requires." 6 months later, I was settling into my new office in Stockholm when a package arrived from MIT. Inside was my old lab notebook, along with a letter from the department acknowledging my contribution to quantum computing and a formal apology. More surprising was what else the package contained. Every email I'd exchanged with Whitmore meticulously preserved in the university archives, including the one where I'd sent him my complete research findings. Someone had also included recent scientific journals. A new paper on quantum computing innovations cited the Carrington method for quantum gate operations. My name was entering the scientific lexicon after all. That evening, I called my parents, something I rarely did before. To my surprise, they had followed the entire story through news reports. "We never understood your work," my mother admitted, "but we always knew you were brilliant. We just didn't know how to show it." "We're proud of you," my father added, "not just for the science, but for standing up for the truth." It was the most meaningful conversation we'd had in years, perhaps ever. Sometimes it takes a public reckoning to catalyze a private one. The most unexpected consequence came 3 weeks later. I received an email from Caltech's quantum computing lab. They had been building on the Carrington method and had encountered an intriguing limitation. They'd identified a potential solution but wanted my input. "We believe your original insight might hold the key to overcoming this barrier," the email read. Attached was their work, brilliant, innovative, and genuinely stuck at a critical juncture. As I reviewed their equations, I felt something I hadn't in 5 years, the pure intellectual excitement of solving a complex problem. That night, I worked until dawn, not because I had to, but because I couldn't stop. By morning, I had sketched out an approach that might work. I drafted a response proposing a collaboration, not as a consultant or advisor, but as a full research partner. Within hours, they accepted enthusiastically. A year after Stockholm, I published my first paper since leaving MIT, a collaboration with the Caltech team that extended the quantum gate approach into new territory. The acknowledgments section thanked the Royal Swedish Academy for their support of ethical scientific practice. As for Whitmore, he resigned from MIT before they could fire him. His startup lost investors and eventually folded. The last I heard, he was living in Florida, occasionally giving paid talks to industry groups, never mentioning quantum gates. The Nobel Committee never awarded the suspended prize. Instead, they revised their nomination and vetting procedures to better identify collaborative contributions and potential misconduct. The following year, they announced a special citation acknowledging my original research, not a Nobel Prize, but a formal recognition of contribution to science. Barbara Whitmore reached out shortly after her divorce was finalized. "I enabled him for years," she admitted, "watched him take credit for others' work while telling myself that's just how academia functions." She had accepted a position teaching ethics at a small liberal arts college, her own form of atonement. The most profound change was internal. The anger and bitterness that had defined 5 years of my life gradually transformed into something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of liberation. I returned to science on my own terms, no longer defined by what had been taken from me, but by what I could still contribute. In my new role with the Academy's Ethics Initiative, I began working with universities to develop protocols protecting student researchers. We created anonymous reporting systems, mandatory attribution reviews before major publications, and mentorship evaluation processes that caught potential problems early. Science is fundamentally about truth, not just in its findings, but in its practice. The system that had failed me was beginning, slowly, to correct itself. Not perfectly, not completely, but meaningfully. One evening, standing at the podium of a conference on research ethics in Copenhagen, I looked out at the audience of graduate students, postdocs, and faculty members. 5 years earlier, I had believed my scientific career was over. Now, I understood it had simply taken an unexpected path, one that might ultimately create more positive change than my original research alone. The pursuit of knowledge, I told them, requires not just intellectual rigor, but moral courage. Science advances not only through discovery, but through integrity. I no longer needed a Nobel Prize to validate my contribution. The truth had finally found its voice. Looking back now, 3 years after Stockholm, I realize that scientific truth has its own gravity. It may be temporarily diverted, but it eventually finds its path. My quantum gate breakthrough is now standard material in graduate textbooks, with my name properly attached. More importantly, the conversation about power, credit, and ethics in academia has expanded beyond whispered warnings to institutional reform. I split my time between the Ethics Initiative in Stockholm and collaborative research with labs across Europe and America. Last month, I returned to MIT, not as a student or faculty, but as a speaker at their newly established Conference on Research Integrity. Whitmore's former office is now a collaborative workspace for doctoral candidates. Sometimes, students ask if I regret the 5 years lost to silence. I don't see them as lost anymore. Those years taught me that science isn't just formulas and theories. It's a human endeavor, with all our frailties and strengths woven through it. That understanding shapes every mentorship relationship I form, every paper I publish, every class I teach. The recording that changed everything sits in a digital archive at the Royal Swedish Academy, alongside historical documents detailing other moments when scientific progress confronted human weakness. It's a reminder that truth matters. Not just the truths we discover about the universe, but the truths about how we conduct ourselves in pursuit of knowledge. If you're facing your own moment of decision between uncomfortable truth and comfortable silence, remember, courage isn't the absence of fear, but the determination that something else matters more. The path may be longer and harder than you expect, but integrity creates its own kind of gravity too. Thanks for watching. If you found this story valuable, please subscribe to the channel for more narratives about science, ethics, and resilience. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one.